everybody. Welcome back to another episode. It's episode 8 now, so we're really getting on and motoring through these. I'm joined by Elise, who's back again this week, and by Stanley Murphy-Johns, who's an Exposé contributor. Great to have you both with us. And this week we're going to be looking at the Six Nations, all things Six Nations, and starting off with the men's tournament. Obviously, as a die-hard England fan, and given my predictions of England winning the title and Wales finishing 4th or 5th, I'll hang my head in shame. First things first, then, I suppose the question is, what went so right for Wales?
You go first, Stanley. Go on.
All right, yeah. I mean, it's an interesting question because I'm not entirely sure it's what went right for Wales so much as what went wrong for other teams when they played against them. But it was a good point, I think, in the final game against France that they analysed. They went at the breakdown, Wales tried to frustrate the rest of the teams, which is the red cards and the yellow and the sin bins came from that. They came from the fact that the Welsh defence and the Welsh line just frustrated teams into forcing mistakes. So it wasn't so much what Wales did right in the Six Nations as really what other teams managed to get wrong and what other teams ended up doing in response to Welsh frustration.
I think, like, either way with Wales, that's right. Either way with Wales, you've got to give them credit for how much they've improved from the 2020 tournament and from the Autumn Nations Cup as well. And see, with Wayne Pivac, I was going to say, with Wayne Pivac at Scarlets, you saw it took him 12 months to get up to speed there, and you're seeing the same thing now. So you said it there, Stanley, about they were the most consistent with everybody else coming up with their best attempts at throwing matches away around them. We saw it even that last game on the extra Friday night, Scotland and France. We saw Brice Doolan go full French flair and let Scotland in for a try for their first win in Paris since '99, rather than just kicking it out and taking the win. Let's say, Elise, where do you think it was a turning point for Wales then? Because that first game against Ireland, obviously they were struggling, even though the Irish had that red card, and they only just clawed it back. But that seemed to spur them on, really.
Oh yeah, 100%. I think that, I have to say it as well. You know, you can't detract against Wales. They had excellent defence, just like you said, Stanley. And I think that it was really, those two games were really pivotal. I will say that I think that from England onwards, from an English perspective, they had a lot of luck that played into it as well. And I suppose, I don't know if you guys want to talk about those two tries.
Can we discuss the English game actually? Because I've heard a lot. So I'm a Welsh fan. I've had a lot of nonsense from English people. We won by more than 14 points. So whatever, you fell apart. Whether or not those two tries, and I don't think those two tries, I think one of them's maybe okay. Well, at least one of them should not have counted. Absolutely. Not a chance it was a try. The fact is, England couldn't find a way of galvanising themselves after it to bring themselves back into the game. They just moaned, and then they lost by more than 14. But if they lost within 14 points, they might have had a point. They might have had an argument. As it is, they fell apart completely and have no claim over that match.
I think
would say that, I mean, even Nigel Owens, right, and World Rugby came out and said that it was the wrong decision. Both of them were the wrong decision. I'll stand for that. I think that it just, you know, we were going to talk about moments of the tournament a bit later on, but my moment of the tournament, I'm saying it already, was when it panned to Rhys Zammit's face after that knock on, and he went, and he just knew that he'd gotten away with murder, you know. And also I think that first one where Josh Adams pipped it down and they weren't ready. I'm not even going to say the ref's name.
Yeah, I mean, it's been in Welsh rugby for quite a while that we've had quick restarts after, like, just a lot of the time it's happened, and they play the referee. They've done it for the last few years, actually, even with Gatland still in. I don't know whether it's the players that we have at the moment, but they're all about. Gareth Edwards had one a couple of years ago where he took a tap and ran to the try line without there's not a chance that the ref was ready, but it counts because they played just on the edge of it. And I think it's the same with the defensive line. So whether or not they were tries, you lost by more than 14 points. So I'm not.
I think the big thing from an English perspective, though, was being admittedly somewhat salty that we lost, but being realistic with it for a second, was it's the penalty count's absolutely killing us. And again, we got ourselves back into the game. Whatever you think about those 2 tries, I'm sure the world and his wife in Wales thinks they were both tries. Everybody in England wearing a red rose that day thinks they weren't. But I think we got ourselves back into the game, and then discipline let us down. And being a bit of a nose for a second, I went through and worked it out. England conceded 69 penalties across the 5 games, which is a Six Nations record for any team, tied jointly with Italy, who set the record 2 hours before them on the final day of the Six Nations. And you just think, like, there's so many experienced players in there. I know, obviously, they've had issues in terms of Saracens players not playing. By all accounts, the England COVID bubble in camp was so much more stringent than anybody else in the tournament. Less said about Josh Adams going off and having a baby shower for the first 2 games, the better. But I think it's one of those where whatever excuses you want to reel out, at the end of the day, the discipline wasn't good enough. And with the players there and the experience there, you would expect more from them.
Yeah, I think as soon as you've got a stat that's either equivalent or worse than anything for Italy, then you've got a real problem. I think it's that's quite a clear issue. I'm not saying that those were tries, by the way. I completely agree that they weren't, but I'm just saying I completely agree with you, Harry. It genuinely doesn't. England weren't going to win the tournament with that penalty count anyway. Would be my argument.
Yeah, 100%. And I know that Sonia McLaughlin got so much flack for pursuing it in the interview afterwards, but she was right. They said they couldn't control what the ref was doing, but what they can control is the penalty count. And I think that's 100% right. I got 67, you got 69, so there you go.
Yeah.
But I also think, I don't know how you guys feel about it, but they were really sluggish starts. I think that for the majority of the time, and in the Autumn Nations, that, you know, England really got ahead on the front foot in the first 10, 20 minutes. But I think that they conceded the first try in their past 7 matches or something like that. And I don't know what that shift has been. I don't know if having so many injuries out, what Marla, or it was personal reasons, Sam Underhill, and that's why they having them go, that they just didn't really get off. I don't know what you guys think about that.
I think a lot of it, from my perspective, and one thing we will say here is obviously with all of the stuff that's come out since, and obviously like the abuse and things that people like Ellis Genge got, or Wales got, Liam Williams got, is completely wrong. So we're just trying to state our opinion, have a laugh, have a joke, and just go from there with it. But I think the big thing for me with England is, personally, Eddie Jones called it when he said international coaching is a 4-year cycle, and then it takes time to redevelop that. So we've got the same players, and he seems to have gone with that mindset of, we got beaten by South Africa in that final in 2019 because they bullied us up front. And he's gone, well, that must be the way to win test matches then, is to kick teams off the park and bully them up front. But it's not. You've got to go with the squad that you've got and the players around you. So you look at that France game, that France-England game. I know, so like Elise said, England have conceded the first try in however many of the last matches it was. And that first France try came from just a bit of pure genius from the French. And there's nothing any defence, I don't think, could have done about that. But England seem lethargic, and they did in the autumn, and they did in the Six Nations in 2020 as well, actually towards the back end of it. And it's almost like I think the phrase I've seen, I think it's very true, is it's boom or bust, and especially with the defence, is there's no in between. Either the defence is really flat, really lethargic, and teams can just trample all over us, or it's as good as it was against the French. Like, you look at that Scotland game at the very start, and I know I'm rambling slightly here, but it pains me to say it as an English fan in an England-Scotland game at Twickenham, but have you ever seen an 11-6 where the winning team actually beat up the losing team by that much and still only won by 5 points? And I don't think we've been able to say that about England for such a long time. And I think it is, a lot of it is it's coming towards the end of that cycle. And Eddie Jones has said he should have chased people in the World Cup final. He's doing the same now, in my opinion. He's trusting that guard that got him there way too much.
So would you argue maybe that in 2019, when they lost that final, that maybe that was the time that Eddie Jones maybe should have moved on? I'm not saying that he should have. I'm just wondering, because since then, they haven't been bad until this Six Nations. Really, they've stayed at a pretty consistent level. But would you say that because they got that far with him and they were looking brilliant, and not winning that, maybe that is just the time to change something? I know you're still coming off the back of coming second, but it's just, yeah.
I would have personally, and see, Elise, not sure whether you'll agree or disagree, I would have kept him in. And I think it's the right call to keep him in because, firstly, I know everyone goes on about a Pat Lam or a Rob Baxter, but there's no natural successor. But also it's one of those where I think the coaching or the senior coaching staff is right, but you need to have the conviction to change the players. And that's the big thing. Is it's a quote that Lawrence Dallaglio came out with, and it was actually, I thought, spot on, is it's harder to get out of that England squad now than it is to get in. Mm-hmm. And you look at it, like, whatever people want to think about the Saracens players or not is up for debate. But England still won the tournament in 2020, despite losing that first game. But surely this year was a perfect opportunity to blood some new players, bring them in and find out either, yes, we are massively reliant on this group of 5 or 6 Sarries players and we need them for leadership and for expertise, or realising actually we've got a brilliant player pool underneath them and let's have some real competition here because we've got it. There's 3 or 4 different players that are good enough to play international rugby, I think, in pretty much every position. But if you don't try them, you don't know. And that's the big thing. And even still, get those players in. Like, we've finally given Henry Slade a run at 13, hardly ever given him the ball. We gave him the ball a couple of times against France, and look at what he did when he finally got the opportunity. And that's what it comes down to, is if you've got that talent at your disposal, you create a game plan for that talent rather than the game plan that you think will win you the most matches.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, we'll move on to Eddie in a second, I think, but one thing I will say about England, especially in this tournament, was that I found the backs just completely uninspiring. Farrell, Ford, just fell really, really flat for me. I think that obviously Watson was on great form, wasn't he, and May as well. But yeah, I just I don't know what to say about that. I think that, yeah, you're right. There are so many great players in all the Premiership sides. I mean, people talk all the time about why isn't Sam Simmons up in the England camp and everything, and I would agree with that. But I don't know. What do you think, Stanley? Do you think that Eddie should still be? We can move on to that if you like.
Well, I didn't think he should leave after 2019 or anything. I just thought that was an interesting point, maybe. But I do think he probably should go now. And I'm not an English fan, as I've said, so I maybe I'm just being more objective with it, I guess. But I feel like it wasn't that they didn't win, that they lost. Like that significant, they didn't come second, or even that they weren't close to competing for it. Even though some of the games were fairly close, I just kind of got hammered. So I would say you got to change things. And if he's not willing to bring in new players, like Wales won the Six Nations and they brought in a lot of new players, a lot of new talent who had decent amounts of game time, maybe could have done with more. But if you look at the pool of players that England have and are not using, that's got to at least be somewhat down to Eddie Jones deciding not to use them. And if that's the case, then he should move on. and they should bring something.
I think it's a great point as well with Wales, with what you said there about blooding new players, is obviously that Autumn Nations Cup. All of the coaches were saying, look, this is just an opportunity for games to get new players in and give Wayne Pivac credit. He did that brilliantly. The likes of Callum Sheedy got some opportunities. Kieran Hardy, who, if it wasn't for injury, would have ended the tournament as Wales' starting 9. James Botham coming through, and you're bang on. And they gave them the opportunities to see if they could match up at that level. And those that couldn't obviously weren't in the Six Nations squad.
Yeah.
If you don't try them, you don't know. And that's the question.
And it's not about changing everything, because we still got Alan Jones, we still got the backs of very experienced now. It's just about making sure that when these players do move on, which they're going to have to, they're flipping old now, some of them, Alan Jones in particular, that there's actual players to replace them. And whilst it may not be perfect, it's gotta be a rotational basis. They can't last forever. And I think England are kind of stuck in their ways at the moment.
I think we'll move on to it in a bit, but they could definitely take a leaf out of the women's England side, because I think that they've done a really excellent job, especially with Daly McLean and bringing Helena Rowland in and getting those new girls, Zoe Harrison, bringing them in and having a really good transition period. And I think that's what's missing. It's just I don't know if you're right. It's just a lethargic element to it, or if it is time for Eddie to go. But I think that 100% it's time to switch captains. I make no secret of my disdain for Farrell, but I just think, especially with the lack of discipline, how can you enforce higher discipline when you have Farrell as your captain? I just think that it's time to move it to a forward, I reckon.
I think it is always like, in defence of Owen Farrell, as he has always been that quite gruff, in-your-face type player, and that's what's got him so much success. But it's one of those where whatever people think about the guy, captaining a team from fly half is such a difficult job. And he did that job brilliantly in the World Cup. But it is one of those things where if you are the main decision maker, the main leader, the main voice, the kicker, the person that you're relying on to get that conversion or that penalty at the end, as experienced a player as Farrell is, as brilliant a player as Farrell is and has been for such a long time, putting all of that weight onto somebody's shoulders is bound to take effect, especially if they've had that little rugby in the build up to the tournament to actually sharpen those basic skills in the first place.
I think you'll never find a person who's not English who likes Owen Farrell. And even within England, you'll only find a handful of people that still like Owen Farrell. And I think if that's the case, how is he still the captain? He's such an easy person to not like that that maybe maybe it's time for. I think a forward should absolutely have it. I completely agree, Elise. It's got to be a forward.
I'd agree with that, and obviously the natural bet for most people would be a Toje, and credit where it's due. Whilst he was a bit of a penalty machine in those first couple of games, he was, with the likes of Tom Curry and Anthony Watson, one of the few standouts for England in the tournament. And he did lead from the front. He did put his body on the line. He did show how quickly he can get up to speed, and he would be your natural choice. I would say. Obviously, he's done it for Sarries in the A-League. He did it with great success for England at under 20 level. Got 2 world titles with them. Looking away from England, then just onto the rest of the tournament and the rest of the teams, regardless of Brice Dulin going full France at the end of that Scotland match. For me, the last couple of years, it's 2 second-place finishes for France now, but I'll admit I've fallen back in love with French rugby again. And it's just so nice to watch them now with that bit of steel that you get from Sean Edwards in defence, with the slightly mad professor vibe that you get from Gautier as a head coach. It's so nice to see them with all of their young talent clicking for the most part and really being a dominant force again. So I was wondering, for the two of you, obviously we saw them come up just short against England and then blow it against Scotland. But how much of a progression have you seen from the French over this tournament and the last 18 months?
I think it's absolutely brilliant to watch. I would say when you say full French, and obviously we know what you mean, it's like it's almost as though they've bottled that and used it as their but finally they have proper format, and that it looks still, it's beautiful to watch in the same way as it being full French is beautiful to watch. But also, they're games, by the way, but were by far the most enjoyable games in this. Every game that they were part of, even the one where they beat us at the end, which I was jumping around the room angrily hitting things. Even then, they were still beautiful to watch. Everything was incredible to watch, but there's actual structure there now, which again, you're right, that does come from the defensive coach. I've absolutely fallen back in love with it in the last 18 months, same as you.
Yeah. Oh, with the French, it's all about striving for consistency, isn't it? We know that they have the potential. My dad always says, and he has done since before I was born, you never know which French team is going to turn up. And, I said this before we started, but, only France could pull that try out of the bag in the 81st minute. It was great to watch, and I think you're right. No matter who you support, watching rugby like that is just so exciting, and it reminds you why you love the game. And I think one thing about this Six Nations is that it's just had all of the drama and all of the competition. I don't remember so many games with so close score lines, and I think that's just really good for rugby in general. It's good to have a competitive nature to it, and I think that 100% they were the best team this year, and I think that they really deserved the wins that they got. And you're right, it's great to see. I love Dupont. I think he's excellent, and it was really great to see Ntamak back. Would he have a double jaw fracture or something like that? Yeah, he is world class, and I think that seeing him back playing was really exciting as well.
Yeah, I think the less said about my Six Nations predictions article that went up, the better. But one thing that I did get right in there, which I am happy about, is Matthew Jalibert being the player to watch for France. He's such a good player. It was gutting he was out injured for that final match. And I know, like Elise said, Ntamak was only just coming back to full fitness, let alone match fitness. But for the French to have those options at fly half, to have Antoine Dupont, who is just like an absolute ball of energy on the pitch at scrum half. And like we've said, obviously, they've got that beautiful flowing attacking game, but then they've managed to combine that with real steel and grit and determination and a brilliant forward pack as well. It's France in 2023 hosting the World Cup with all of these young players, with 2 more years of this cycle of experience. New Zealand first up for opening night of the tournament. It's a mouth-watering prospect just how well they could do going forwards if they can keep this setup and keep this cohesion. And I suppose that is the big thing with France. It's not just the on-the-field stuff, it's the off-the-field stuff, is can they keep this cohesion? And we saw what happened with some of the stuff. Oh, sorry, Stanley. I was going to quickly just say some of the stuff we saw, obviously, Wafflegate, take of that what you will. Fabien Galtier after the Wales match saying that Wales are being coached in how to get players red carded. They're the sort of French faux pas that, to be honest, that's the sort of thing Galtier would say. It's the player he was and it's the coach he was. But if they can sort out the off-the-field stuff as well as the on-the-field stuff, then it honestly is a frightening prospect for the rest of world rugby.
I completely agree with that. I was going to ask, with regards to the 2023 World Cup, what would you like to see happen to England by that time as a squad? If you're going to compete in the way that you competed in 2019, if you're going to play like that, what would you like to see happen by the time it happens?
I think it's a thing of whoever's coaching, whoever's in the box seat, you want to see an evolution of the game. That I know we've just talked about France, that France-England game and that France-Wales game, was so good because both teams went hammer and tong with everything they had and just threw caution to the wind. And we saw it in that England-France game. England had got the players to do it, and England realised we can't use this power pack game against France that we've created at the moment if we're going to have any chance of winning this game. So let's match them and let's unleash our own talents. And I suppose that's what I'd like to see is giving those talents an opportunity. Like, I think it's understandable that he chose Scotland because obviously his dad used to play for them, but someone like Cam Redpath would have been absolutely unbelievable in an England team if he was given the opportunity to shine. He's obviously he did it for Scotland against England, and he'll do it for Scotland for many years to come. But giving those more mercurial players, if you like, an opportunity to do their thing with caution. So like I said, I know we've already touched on Henry Slade. Henry Slade has learned how to adapt that game style that he has for the international game, and it works superbly. You think the likes of Joe Simmons would be able to do that as well. Marcus Smith, just rattling off these names. They're absolutely brilliant players that need to be given an extended run in the camp first. And that's what I'd like to see is, I mean, the England squad on average is actually still quite a young team for international level. I think like the average age is 27, 28. But I'd like to see some of these players that are tearing it up in the Prem and have been consistently for the last few years brought into that squad just to add that competition that we've already been talking about. And that's what I think we need for 23 is to just renew that competition for places, because that's how you're going to drive everyone else on to improve.
Yeah, I completely agree. I really do think it's about having that new talent in, and even if they're not using them, like you say, giving them a longer run in camp, giving it a bit, making it more competitive, you know, giving them something to fight for. But I would also say, I think Marcus Smith, I think from Quins, I think he would be really electric to bring in someone like that. Yeah, I would just agree with Harry. I think that's the way to go.
So very briefly, whilst we're moving through the teams, then we'll save Italy for a conversation at the end, but let's talk about Scotland and Ireland together then. Obviously, Scotland had that first win against England, that first win at Twickenham since 1983, beat France in Paris for the first time since 99. Despite the fact they won 3 games, they still finished fourth, which I found quite entertaining. But you've seen a marked improvement in that Scottish team. And obviously with Ireland as well, we saw it towards the end of the tournament, Andy Farrell's game plan and Johnny Sexton actually being able to stay fit for a continued run of games really helped them. So my question to both of you then is, where do you think those two teams are in terms of their progression and from where they started to where they are now?
So I know we've just talked about how brilliant France is and how brilliant the French progression has been, but on a slightly longer basis, the Scottish progression to actually being a very competitive team that could quite easily win against any of the sides, been probably my favourite thing to watch over the last 3 or 4 years, 3 or 4 Six Nations, maybe even more than that. I think they have brilliant players, and I think on their day, they are the best squad possibly. And I kind of hope that they win a Six Nations. If Wales don't, then my secondary is always Scotland. I have no affiliation with Scotland, but I would quite like them to at some stage win a Six Nations. And with regards to Ireland, I think they kind of have Sexton as a crutch, and I think that's problematic. I feel like he's going to either get injured or retire, and there needs to be more of a in the same way as England, there needs to be more of a progression, more new players coming through, etc. Because Sexton seems to be the lifeblood of that team, and I think that's eventually going to cause a problem for them.
I would agree about Ireland. I think with Scotland as well, it's really impressive to be able to see like Hulk moving around and to still have that consistency. I think that maybe other lesser teams would have struggled a bit more there, but he was really great this year, really pivotal. I think that like Finn Russell is amazing. It was a shame about his red card, but you know, incidental. Yeah, I would agree with about Ireland. I think that I didn't pay too much attention to them, to tell you the truth, throughout the tournament. I think they're like pretty solid, but yeah, I think that you're completely right. Now that you've articulated that, I think that he is a master tactician, Sexton, but yeah, they do use him as a bit of a crutch.
I mean, I'm going to go rogue here with Scotland. Personally, I'd have 4 Scots in my starting team for the Lions this year. I'd have Xander Fagerson, because I think the guy is an absolutely class prop. I'd have Johnny Gray in the second row. Alan Price, for me, I think has been the standout British scrum half this year. Then obviously I'd have Stuart Hogg at fullback. But even still,
you've got to have Stuart Hogg.
Hogg's got to be at 15. But I think it's one of those where whatever nationality you are, it's just so nice to be able to sit there and think about all these different Scottish players that are suddenly coming to the mix for the Lions. You'd sit there and you go, Van der Merwe on the wing could be an option. Cam Redpath, if he's fit. Chris Harris at 13, unbelievable defensive operator. And I think, for me, I think both of you are bang on with Ireland. Sexton is such a class act, has been for so long, but he is in those dying embers of his career now. And I suppose they've tried with Billy Burns, they've tried with Joey Carberry before he got injured, and obviously he's coming back now, but there is no natural successor in that key position, and not really at scrum half either, if you're being honest. I know Conor Murray's slightly younger, but I think as solid a team as Ireland are, and they've got some brilliant players in there. Tide Bairn, I thought, was outstanding all tournament. They need to start. It's all well and good them blooding youngsters in positions where they've always been strong, like the second row, like the back row. But like you both said, it's that half-back pairing that they need to try and nail on to keep going forward.
Yeah. Well, I'd go further and say that Ireland, for a while was by far the strongest team, and then Rory Best, that was his name, right? Retired, and so did O'Connor. And I feel like, they were at different times, but they were both such huge names for Irish rugby that when they went, that maybe started the decline. And then when Sexton leaves, that'll be yet more that they need to adapt to and bring back. I feel like Wales are going to go through a similar thing when Halfpenny finally retires, when Alan Wynne-Jones goes, Faletau Tipuric. When those players move on that are, have had substantial careers by this point, you're bound to get a period where you dip out of form. So I don't think it's going to be too problematic for Ireland, because I think they'll come back stronger eventually.
Well, the final team for us to talk about then is Italy. And it's a difficult one, because obviously they've not won a game for donkey's years in the Six Nations. They've got Franco Smith in as head coach now, who's vastly experienced South African. They've got some really good youngsters. Admittedly, Stephen Varney and Callum Brayley and Seb Negri and Jake Pelledri. Italy's a fantastic production line in Gloucester that they've got going for them at the moment. But they've got some really good, talented players, and credit where it's due, they actually did try and play with a pretty decent attacking structure, I thought, at times. Monty Ioane, I thought, was great on the wing for them. But it's that age-old problem with Italy, isn't it, of just not being competitive, not being in the games. And you look at Georgia, I know everyone keeps talking about Georgia. They've won 19 games straight now in that Rugby Europe Championship. They got the opportunity in the Autumn Nations Cup. But a team like Georgia could potentially start regressing if they're not given that opportunity. So first of all, I suppose the two of you, what's your thoughts on Italy? And then what's your thoughts on promotion and relegation, and in what form from the Six Nations?
I think Italy, I think they always seem to have quite a strong opening 20 minutes. And then it just, discipline goes out the window and everything just starts disintegrating. So I don't know what needs adjusting there. I think that when you go so long having not won anything, I think that you start off strong and then slowly fade out, and that's pretty, expected. I like that. I loved what Eddie Jones said, that he referred to them as a new developing side. I think we're a bit past new by now. Relegation, I don't know, to tell you the truth. I think that it would be, from an English perspective, I wouldn't want George to come in, because I have a feeling that in England's current state that that Georgia will probably rival them a little bit, but it would make it more competitive and it would make it more interesting. I don't know how many chances Italy have to get or what, but yeah, I'm split on that, to tell you the truth.
I might actually go as far as to give them an ultimatum of some form, like, we'll bring Georgia in if you can't win 2 games next Six Nations, or if you can't be within a set. Obviously not saying this and very publicly, but behind closed doors, just you have to win next year, or the year after we're going to bring Georgia in instead, and then the relegation thing. I feel like just doing it off of the back of a Six Nations that really, for Italy was very, very little difference to the last few. They competed in some games, they still lost every game. To just go, yeah, okay, you're right, no, that's it, would be too harsh. And I feel like next year, fingers crossed, touch wood, there'll be fans. If it is going to be their last year in the Six Nations, they can have a proper send-off from it. And then if it's not, if they do manage to compete and they win games, then there's no need to get rid of them, because it is nice as a current six. Seems quite nice. It's been there for a long time. There's no real need to change it if they can compete. But that would be my.
Yeah, they lost each game by an average of 48-11 as a scoreline this tournament. But and this is the thing. I think it's worth pointing out. Obviously, I mentioned Jake Pellegrini and Seb Negri there, who are such crucial players for them. Now, they were missing several key players for them this tournament. Matteo Minozzi, the Wasps fullback, obviously chose not to play because otherwise he would get the choice of not seeing his family for 7 weeks or representing his country or not. And everyone has to obviously respect the choice that he made to stay with his family and just get regular Prem game time. So they've got options. They've got really good players. But I think, like you said about giving them that ultimatum, there's only so long that a team like Georgia can keep banging on the door, and a team like Italy can literally be trying to use their whole body weight to hold the proverbial trapdoor down below them. I think one of the ideas that's been touted around by quite a lot of people, which I think is sensible, is because it's only 4 or 5 years ago France finished bottom of the Six Nations and had an absolute stinker, which people seem to forget. I think having a playoff between bottom in the Six Nations and top of the Rugby Europe Championship, and have that in your June window. So that June window where everyone seems to play one warm-up game and then go on their summer tours, or they go on their summer tours and have a development game whilst they're over there, have that game there, have it in the country that finished bottom of the Six Nations, so they still get home advantage from being in there, but you give Georgia the opportunity. And if, whether that's every year or every 2 years, Georgia are getting a game, or Romania or Spain, they're getting a game against a similar standard team and they're losing, well, that proves that at the moment they're not quite ready, but they're still getting that opportunity to prove themselves. And I think, for me, I think that would be the sensible approach, and that would be a more joined up approach as well in terms of the global game that everyone keeps preaching about at the moment as well.
Yeah, no, that makes sense to me. I think I'd be quite intrigued to see if Georgia hammered Italy in that game. That would be quite eye-opening in terms of, how have we ignored them for this long, if they really can just destroy Italy in a similar way to the teams in the Six Nations are doing currently. And it would be absolutely great to have more, even more competitive stuff in the Six Nations itself, to have yet another team that could actually legitimately challenge for the title would be brilliant.
So to wrap up this section then, reviewing the men's tournament, I thought if we all just very briefly go round and start off with our player of the tournament first.
This is quite close for me. I originally thought Reece Zammit, just because it's just been so impressive at 20 years old, which really puts us to shame. 4 tries. It's just a really stunning impact coming in like that. But I would have to say Dupont. I just think he's amazing to watch. Like say Harry, yeah, he would be my player of the tournament, I think.
Okay, brilliant. By you not taking Reece Zammit, I can take Reece Zammit. And my friend knows him because everyone in Wales knows each other. So, you know, they were family friends, apparently. He seems like a lovely kid who's going to have a really, really brilliant career. And I'm very excited as a Welsh fan to watch him in future tournaments. So, yeah, he's my player of the tournament.
See, I'm going to go slightly left field with my one. And I'm going to go with Tide Bairn for Ireland. So he's finally been getting his opportunity now. He's been carving up in the Pro 14 Celtic League stuff, and he was obviously filled in for Omani at 6 once he got the ban. I think he's been absolutely superb throughout the whole tournament. If you're talking about a Lions bolter, if you like, he's somebody a bit like Ian Henderson did in 2017, who his performances, he seems to have played himself onto the plane. So he's who I'd go with as a slightly left field choice. Elise, I know you've kind of touched on it already, but we'll go around again then. So the next one is our moment of the tournament from each of us.
Yeah, it is Sammet's face. I just think that was brilliant, and they knew exactly what cut to make to that. It just epitomised the whole thing. That was my moment, yeah.
In response to that, I almost want to say that my moment of the tournament is Dan Biggar asking the ref if he can play and then playing it over that for that second awful not a try. But in fact, I think my moment of the tournament, despite it being against Wales, is probably that final French try against Wales, because it was brilliant and they deserved that. And they had a red card and they still came back to, we had such control in that game. They played their way back into it, and to win in the 81st minute in that way with a beautiful kick, a beautiful out wide, and then it was a brilliant piece of rugby that you got to appreciate. So that's my moment of the tournament, I think.
I'm going to be slightly dull and go with that as my moment as well, and not just because I was celebrating with sheer delight at Wales missing out on a Grand Slam. But like Stanley said, I thought it was perfect rugby, never say die attitude. And I think for me, regardless of who was playing, regardless of who scored it, it really summed up what's been such a close, such an entertaining and quite frankly, mad Six Nations tournament. And I think that play at the end there, just that calmness with a sea of chaos going on around them, I think summed that up perfectly for me. So I think personally, this might be a choice between 2 or 3 games, the match of the tournament for all 3 of us.
Yeah, I would have to be dull and say France winning over Wales. I think close second, England, France. That was a good game as
well. In that case, I probably would say France, Wales, but I think I'm going to go with England, Scotland, because I enjoyed that immensely. I really liked Scotland winning that. I gotta say, or maybe against Scotland, France, because either way, Scotland did good job and made me happy in both ways. So, yeah, probably Scotland and England, because they showed great desire to win that game. It was really enjoyable.
From an England perspective, then obviously I'm going to go with the France game at Twickenham with Toje's late try. Firstly, because it's probably one of the only few bright sparks that actually got me off my seat throughout the entire tournament as an England fan. But also, along with that Wales-France game at the end, personally, I think it is up there as one of the greatest championship matches we've had, just because of the quality and the ferocity that both teams came with. So the final one from me then, we'll go around again, is our try of the tournament.
So, while you're thinking, Stanley, I would say Doolan, but I feel like we've laboured that a little bit too much. So the other one I would say, I'll go with, I think, Keith Earls, when off that line out, was it Conan that caught it and popped it him? I just think that was textbook. I say that I didn't really pay that much attention to Ireland, but that was perfect rugby. Like, if you had to write it down in a playbook, just the way he fixed everyone, that was amazing to watch.
I'm gonna go with, I could go with any of Rees-Zammit's tries, but I'm actually going to go with the one against Italy. So the worst opposition. The interception followed by the sprint the entire way down the field to place it in between the posts was just, I mean, it typified what he is as a player. It displayed his insane speed and just the awareness of the play as well. So yeah, I really enjoyed that try just as a fan.
I'm going to go with sticking with the England-France theme. Then I'm going to go with that second France try against England, which again was a set play. Damien Penaud going in, and I think it was in the corner with that beautiful little lofted pass from Jalibert. And it was just, again, it was for me a perfect set piece try, perfectly executed, and it summed up all that French rugby is about at the moment. And for me, I thought that was standout. Cool. So we'll leave it there for part one of our Six Nations wrap, focusing on the men's tournament with Wales winning their second title in 3 years. Thanks very much to Elise and for Stanley for joining me on this one. But that's not all. Stick around, because coming up either tomorrow or Friday will be a preview for the women's tournament as well, which gets underway on Saturday, the 3rd of April. So thanks so much for joining us, and we'll see you again in a couple of days' time.